All right. This is The Earth and Its Peoples by Richard Bulliet, Chapter 20 Between Europe and China, 1500 to 1750. Section 3, The Mughal Empire, 1526 to 1739. So, in looking at and talking about the land empires in Asia, let's go back to our map here. The Mughals are this empire here in the red. We had previously covered the Safavids in the orange and the Ottomans in the green. The central kind of base of power for the Mughals was northern India. So this dark red area here is where the Mughals have most control and strength. But the outline shows the extent to which the Mughals controlled India. And two important things to take note of when looking at this map. The first one is to take note that the southern tip of India was out of Mughal control. And between 1500 and 1750, this is a time period where Europeans, first the Portuguese, later the Dutch, later the French, later the British, are arriving on the shores of India, especially in the south, but not exclusively, and establishing trading posts all along that region there. So you can see kind of where Europeans were trading in the Indian Ocean in relation to the larger power base there, that is the Mughal rulers. Now, the Mughals are unique in one respect, and that is demographics. Whereas the Ottomans and the Safavids, for the most part, were pretty diverse empires in terms of ethnicities and languages, especially the Ottomans, all sorts of different population groups in terms of religion, ethnicity, and language. In the Mughal Empire, there's pretty much two demographics. On the one hand, you have Muslims, and Muslims are in the minority in terms of the population, but tend to be the ruling class. Anywhere between maybe 10 to 15% of the people in the Mughal Empire are Muslim, but 80 to 90% of them are the positions of power are pretty much all exclusively Muslim, with some exceptions. So again, a Muslim minority in terms of population, but the ruling class. Most people in the Mughal Empire are Hindu, and they make up maybe 85%. And so unlike maybe some of the other empires we talked about, an effort to get coexistence between these two demographics is a major goal for the Mughal Empire, or maybe not even just coexistence, but how does the empire solve the question of having a minority ruling class over a majority population? Now, the foundations for the empire, for the Mughals, are created with Babur, sometimes called the Tiger, as his nickname was. And the original Mughal rulers were Mongol by descendants. We might say Mongol descendants. In fact, the word Mughal is simply just the Persian word for Mongol, so very much based off of that history of conquest that the Mongols had. And Babur was successful in defeating and conquering the Sultanate of Delhi, so we might say conquered by Babur to establish Mughal rule. The Sultanate of Delhi was the previous ruler in that region, northern India. Probably the most important ruler during Mughal era was Akbar, who earned the nickname the Great. With a nickname like that, the history books tend to view Akbar's rule as pretty favorable. One thing Akbar did was to grant what was called mansabdars. And a mansabdar is a person given a land grant by the Mughals. Most of these were Muslim, but there were some religious minorities who were given land grants by Akbar. In terms of European trade, the Mughals really looked at European traders not as the enemy, They really didn't view Europeans as a threat, but more of an asset, maybe. We might also say not as the enemy, but an opportunity. In fact, trade with Europeans could be very valuable to the Mughals. One trade good in particular was guns, and at certain points during the Mughal rule, one way that the 10% or 15% of the population controlled the other 85% was through putting down rebellions. And so European weaponry could really serve the Mughal ruling class well if there were Hindu rebellions that broke out throughout the continent or subcontinent. And of course, trade was very valuable. So Europeans were not really viewed as much as a threat. Now, under Akbar's rule, he really tries to create social harmony, right? Mainly between Hindu and Muslims. And he does this in a number of ways. One was to have or appoint Rajputs. A Rajput is a Hindu with a mansab. A mansab is simply just the name for the land grant. A mansabdar is a person who had been granted land. So this was a Hindu. And Akbar, about 15% of all land grants were given to Hindus as a way to show that it wasn't exclusively, that there wasn't particular exclusion of Hindus, that they were included in some ways. When it came to law codes, Akbar allowed Hindu law to rule Hindus and Sharia law for Muslims. In a way, this is a way of maybe discouraging any sort of religious revolt, allow for law codes to be applied within each community the way they see fit. Akbar also married a Hindu woman, married a Hindu, we'll say Hindu woman, and promoted intermarriage between Muslims and Hindus. By marrying a Hindu woman, this ensured that Akbar's children, or the heir to the throne, would have both Hindu and Muslim heritage, and that was a way, again, of trying to create religious reconciliation. Probably Akbar's most interesting and famous effort at achieving social harmony was creating the divine faith. The divine faith was a religion created by Akbar. And pretty much what it did was that it borrowed or took elements of all religions. Pretty much how it worked was that Akbar frequently had religious scholars invited to his palace, which they would debate various religious ideas. So a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, they would come in and have these debates. Akbar would proceed over them and watch. And he created this faith by essentially picking the best parts of each one, right? We'll take this element of Christianity, we'll take this element of Buddhism, we'll combine them all together, create this divine faith, and this will be the really the way to achieve social harmony where religious differences no longer exist. Very interesting idea, very ambitious idea. However, when Akbar died, the divine faith died. The religion never really lived on beyond the ruler. Under Akbar, the Mughals experienced probably their golden age. This was a time of economic prosperity and, for the most part, an effort at social harmony. Akbar's grandson, Aurangzeb, took a completely different approach to the demographic problem, and that was to, instead of encouraging social harmony, was to strictly enforce Islam. So a lot of religious restrictions under Aurangzeb were put back on Hindus, especially other religious minorities, but especially Hindus because they were the majority population. You also saw this represented when it came to the depiction of women in art. So, for example, Hindu artists depicted, or sometimes depicted, women scantily clad, not really with a lot of clothes, maybe in overtly sexual ways. When Aurangzeb took control, a lot of that artwork was either destroyed or repressed, and a lot of those artists were essentially put out of business. So it went from laws, policies, to even things like artwork. Now, during the late 1700s, the Mughals experienced certainly more decay and, again, more regional challenges. In the early 1700s, the peacock throne, this was the Mughal throne, was stolen by Persians who successfully raided the Mughal city. The peacock throne, in a lot of ways, was like the symbol of Mughal power. And even though the empire, existed roughly into the 1840s to 1850s, technically a Mughal empire still exists in the 1850s. By 1739, and especially best symbolized by having their throne stolen, the Mughals really don't have a lot of control in India. Instead, it's a lot more local and regional rulers. A Nawab is a title for a regional ruler. And when the French, and British push more into India, they're not really dealing with a strong Mughal state, but instead are dealing with a lot of these independent rulers who have asserted authority in the absence of a strong central state in the Mughals.